Good morning, Messiah. This is Katie Moss. I decided to try to do my hymn devotion as a video in addition to the paper copy you can find on the website. And I have two special guests with me. This is Magdalena. That was my dog, Porter. She's very excited to meet you all, even if it's not in the traditional way. My husband and I chose the name Magdalena because of the character from the Bible, Mary Magdalene, who was one of the first people to see Jesus after he rose from the dead. But after we chose that name, we actually learned about or remembered two other important Magdalenas in our life. Martin Luther had a daughter, Magdalena. And then J.S. Bach, actually one of his, I think he had two wives at least. One of his wives was named Anna Magdalena. And if you have played the piano or know someone that does, they might have played some of the pieces from Anna Magdalena's notebook. That was a collection that Bach, he kind of took some pieces from people that he knew and put them together in a volume for her to play at home. So I thought those were kind of some pretty cool namesakes for this little girl. But anyways, she's going to be my special guest. I don't think she'll be much help in this hymn devotion, but we're going to give it a try. So today I would like to talk about the opening hymn for Sunday. It's a contemporary hymn by David Haas called You Are Mine. A couple months ago, we used it as our doxology for our series on fear and not being afraid. So it's got a lot of really nice comforting images for us, talking about God's providence and his presence with his people throughout time in the midst of trials and difficulties. So what I did this week is I took each of the verses and I looked at some Bible stories that I thought really fit with them, so we can use these Bible stories as examples for our devotion today. One of the big blessings for me with maternity leave and then also with this shutdown is I've been spending a lot more time in the Bible and in prayer, so I hope that that's been the case for you as well. Our first verse reads, I will come to you in the silence. I will lift you from all your fear. You will hear my voice. I claim you as my choice. Be still and know I am here. When I read this stanza, it reminded me of the story of Elijah from 1 Kings chapter 19. Elijah was a very strong, faithful, and outspoken prophet, but he too faced a lot of fear in his life. In chapter 19, he's fleeing from the evil King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, who had killed many prophets and were out to seek his life as well. He ran from them and he fled under a tree, and he felt so worthless and ill-equipped for what God had called him to do that he wanted to die. He said, It is enough now, O Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers. In spite of all of this fear, the Lord provided for Elijah. He gave him food and water that was so miraculous that Elijah was able to travel another 40 days on the strength of the Lord's food. In all of this, we're reminded that the Lord comes to us and his presence is with us and he strengthens us even in really difficult times. You probably know the story of Elijah that follows this, which is the reason that I really picked this chapter. God comes to Elijah not in a strong wind or a fire or an earthquake, but in a low whisper. We're reminded of this line from the hymn, I will come to you in the silence. You will hear my voice. Be still and know that I am here. It's God's words and promises, not the scary aspects of nature, not earthquakes, not fires, and not viruses that remind us of God's power and his mercy. Stanza 2. I am hope for all who are hopeless. I am eyes for all who long to see. In the shadows of the night, I will be your light. Come and rest in me. In this example, I thought I would share with you some reading I've been doing. In my Bible, I'm trying to go chronologically. And when I got to the time in between the Old and New Testaments, I decided to read the Apocrypha, which is a collection of extra biblical literature that was written in between the time of the Old and New Testament. So it gives us some really interesting historical insights. There are books of poetry as well. Kind of shares with us how the Jewish people of that time lived and how they viewed the Old Testament and how they were looking forward to seeing Jesus in the New Testament. Let me put her down for a second, then I'll be right back with you. All right, so in my reading, I just finished the books of 1st and 2nd Maccabees from the Apocrypha. And this is a story of the Jewish people under persecution from some of the empires that had taken over them, the Greeks particularly. And in the book of 1st Maccabees, chapter 4, the Jewish people have been kicked out of Jerusalem and kicked out of their temple. Their leader, Judas Maccabeus, realizes that they're up against a great army, too big for them. He prays to God for deliverance. He compares their situation to that of David and Goliath, which was another very hopeless situation. But the Lord is with them and delivers them from this battle. The Jews are able to return to the temple. They're able to cleanse the things that have been desecrated. They're able to rededicate their sacred vessels. And this actually leads to the institution of the Jewish festival of Hanukkah, which, as you may know, is also called the Festival of Lights. Sorry, my dog has a shoe, so I'm just kind of checking in on him. The Festival of Lights, and legend says that God provided enough oil for the light to keep burning the 8 days that they were celebrating the festival. So all these things, I think, tie nicely to this hymn verse. God is hope for all who are hopeless. In the shadows of the night, he will be our light. And then also I thought about this story in light of this pandemic, because the Jews are very joyful when they are able to come back to the house of the Lord. And that reminds us of the hope we have to look forward to of returning to church in person. And we can be reminded that when we go to church, when we worship the Lord, that we are keeping our Sabbath. We are resting in him and his gifts. At the end of this stanza says, "Come and rest in me." The third verse, "I am strength for all the despairing, healing for the ones who dwell in shame. All the blind will see, the lame will all run free, and all will know my name." This stanza really reminded me of the miracles of Jesus and the events of his life. So let's look at the first two lines. Healing for the ones who dwell in shame reminded me of the story of John 8, 1-11, of the woman caught in adultery. The Pharisees and scribes bring her to Jesus and want to stone her, but Jesus turns it back on them and says, "Examine your own sin before judging that of others." And then he turns to the woman, forgives her sins, and implores her to sin no more. So he provides healing for her who was caught in an act of great shame. In the first line of the stanza, since we just recently finished Easter and Holy Week, I thought of the crucifixion to meditate on. Jesus is the strength for those who are despairing, and many of his disciples and his followers despaired during the time of his crucifixion and his death. They had forgotten that he had promised that he would rise from the dead. But even in his humiliation on the cross, he showed that he was mighty to save. He gave his mother Mary over to the care of his disciple John, and he forgave his enemies. And in his resurrection glory, he appeared to both the women on Easter morning and to the despairing disciples on the road to Emmaus. My dog is really having at that shoe this morning, so hopefully it survives this devotion. Finally, stanza 4, "I am the word that leads to all freedom. I am the peace the world cannot give. I will call your name, embracing all your pain. Stand up, now walk and live." The Apostle Paul was called by name on the road to Damascus after he had been persecuting the church. He was called to serve the church. Paul wrote about the freedom of the gospel and the peace that it gives, but we also hear that he suffered for the sake of Jesus, both in imprisonment, in persecution, and then also we read that the Lord had given him a thorn in his side to remind him to be humble because he had been given great grace. In the letter to the Romans, we hear from Paul, the Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with him, in order that we may also be glorified with him. Christ embraced all of our pain and suffering on the cross. He suffered so that we might be free from sin. Before I play this hymn for you, or try to, and sing a little bit, I just want to direct you to the website. I've listed a few Bible verses there that I found very comforting during this time and that really tie in with the refrain of the hymn. Do not be afraid, I am with you. I have called you each by name. Come and follow me, I will bring you home. I love you and you are mine. And just a couple personal notes on the verses you'll see. Joshua 1:9, which I included in this devotion, is my confirmation verse, also my mom's confirmation verse. And then the passage from John, it's from the Good Shepherd passage, where Jesus talks about being the Good Shepherd. And my husband and I heard this lesson in our church this past Sunday, which a lot of churches celebrate as Good Shepherd Sunday. So it was just in my mind, and so I thought I would pick that up and put it down for you for your meditation. Let me grab my shoe from my dog, and then I'm going to play this hymn for you and sing a little bit, You Are Mine. Porter. It barely survived. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I'll hope to see you next week with or without the baby. God's peace.